Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Business in the Community's first Circular Economy event. I'm Maureen O'Donnell, manager of our Business Working Responsibly Mark scheme and an advisor for Business in the Community. Just some housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and our panelists are eagerly awaiting your questions. So please submit them by using the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Just as a reminder that as a member of Business in the Community, your organization is part of a movement for sustainable business. We've got more than 100 of Ireland's leading companies as part of our network. And today, you're going to hear from 4 of them. Our panelists, who I will invite to the stage after a brief introduction to the circular economy, includes Veolia, Musgrave, Arup, and Irish Cement. They have 4 very interesting perspectives on the circular economy, which they'll introduce, and then we'll turn the bulk of our conversation over to Q&A. So please be thinking of some challenging questions. But before we introduce them, and just to frame our conversation, I've got a few points defining the circular economy and how it has evolved over the last number of years. So, it's believed that 60% of the climate change issue could be solved by transitioning to a fully circular economy. Yet today, the world is only 9% circular. What does that mean? To understand the circular economy, it might be helpful to first understand the linear economy. The linear economy is one where we take resources from the earth, we make a product, we use the product, and then at its end of life, we dispose of it. So take, make, use, and dispose. This model treats the world's resources as though they are an infinite supply. But we know that there isn't an infinite supply of resources, and this is what the circular economy recognizes and attempts to address. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation describes 3 key principles of a circular economy: designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use for as long as possible, and then regenerating natural systems rather than depleting them. So on our next slide then, we talk about how in order to do this, the circular economy is focused in some respects on waste. And what you see here is the evolution of thought, particularly over the last 10 years or so. As Business in the Community circular economy expert, I've been working in this space since about 2006. But really the idea of circular economy goes back to the 1970s. And if you really want to think about it, the idea of circular economy actually goes back thousands of years. There's evidence, for example, of recycling in Pompeii and other archaeological sites. But that's a topic, I suppose, for another day. So today, let's just talk about the last 10 years. For the last decade, Ireland has been evolving its waste policy and strategy as the EU has moved out on more aggressive targets towards reducing waste. In 2012, the focus in Ireland was largely on how to increase recycling and energy recovery to get the most of what they saw as a resource, minimizing the amount of waste that was landfilled or exported for landfills. So in 2015, when the EU released the Circular Economy Action Plan, this was a pretty significant step towards starting to connect the dots between waste and a circular economy. Having achieved a lot of the targets that were set out in that 2015 plan, in 2020, the EU then updated their Circular Economy Action Plan to align with the Green New Deal. And following after that, Ireland updated its waste strategy as a resource strategy to this new waste action plan for the circular economy. And I think the intention is quite bold because it's accelerating transition to a circular economy by mainstreaming it. And a couple of the key points of this new plan include a sustainable product policy framework, the identification of 7 key products to focus on what can make the most significant impact. So products that they think can potentially impact would include things like ICT, plastics, construction waste, food waste. Then there's the identification of 6 key actions for waste that include reduction targets, identifying substances of concern, and defining an EU end of waste criteria. And then I suppose there's also this idea of innovation, implementing what the government calls strategic interventions across skills, social policy, climate action, and global collaboration. So it's a bold plan. Will the actions actually go far enough? Will we see a rapid transition towards a circular economy? I don't know. But I think that's a great question for our panel if you would like to ask that in the Q&A. And I'd like to introduce our panel today. We have Declan White, who is the Regional Director for the Southern Region of Veolia, Ireland. We have John Curran, Head of Sustainability for Musgrave Group. We've got Janet Lynch, Circular Economy Consultant for Arup, and Brian Gilmore, Communications Manager for Irish Cement. And just as a reminder, once again, to our audience, questions. We want your questions. That's going to help us drive the discussion today. So enough of the slides, over to our panel. Declan, if we could please start with you, and if you could just give us 5 minutes on Veolia's perspective on the circular economy.
Thanks very much, Maureen. Appreciate that. 5 minutes, it's not very long. We've been warned to keep to the time, so we'll do my best. Maureen's gone through some of the circular economy. You can see it's a vast subject, and it can mean different things to different people. But from a business point of view, I like to think there's one simple sentence definition that I look at. It's a circular economy is an economic system aimed at eliminating waste and continual use and reuse of resources. So that contrasts a bit with what we have seen since the original industrial revolution, where it was a cradle to grave, and it was extraction, production, and disposal. So that's not a sustainable way, as we all know, and we think it's generally accepted. So there's another description of the approach the circular economy takes is from lust to dust. So that's thinking about the end of the useful life of a product, even when it's at the conception stage, that's the lust part, I suppose, and right through to decommissioning and recycling and disposal. So that's the circular aspect of circular economy. But the economy aspect that that's important to us, and that focus of my talk is the life cycle approach to investment and operational costs. There can be substantial capital expenditure required in order to build the infrastructure and the manufacturing process in order to take advantage of circular opportunities. And that's what we see in our business. So a couple of examples in Veolia Ireland. So we provide water, wastewater, and hazardous waste services to pharmaceutical clients, to Irish Water. So we're in sort of large scale operation, large scale capital expenditure projects. And some of the examples we have of circular economy are the sludge, reuse of sludge in Osborstown in Naas on their sludge facility, where we have refurbished the facility to put in advanced anaerobic digestion of the sludge to produce a biosolid. That anaerobic digestion generates methane gas, which gets used in a CHP engine to derive the electricity for the operation of the plant. So previously, before we built this, the sludge from the plant was dried, and this would have consumed 20 gigawatts of gas a year. Now the sludge goes through this advanced oxidation, AD plant, and actually generates gas, and so the whole facility is energy neutral. And then the sludge that's generated, the treated sludge, then gets spread on agricultural land. So it is a very circular economy, and that's a project for Irish Water that we've put in. Another one is where we soften water from a water treatment plant for potable water, and that removes the hardness from the water, the stuff that clogs up your kettle. So we remove that, and it creates a calcium carbonate product like agricultural lime, and that gets spread on agricultural land as a soil conditioner as well. So again, it's something that previously would have taken up energy or have to be burnt or go to landfill, and now it's a circular. That's on the water side. On the industrial side, we've quite a substantial hazardous waste business, and there's multiple examples, and that's when we're looking at the waste as not something to be managed, but something as a resource that we can reuse. So as I said, our clients would be pharmaceutical clients or electronics or automotive clients, and things like we would work with the cement kilns, where we would take solvents and fuel blend them in our facility in Fermoy, and then bring those solvents to bring that fuel, resultant fuel, to the cement kilns where they burn it to make cement. It's a secondary liquid fuel, and that's a partnership we have with the cement kilns. And so instead of burning it in a high temperature incinerator and getting no value, it's replacing fuel that would have been diesel or gas in the cement kiln. Also, we would take some solvents and distill them and produce chemicals that can be used again in the process, like cyclohexanane or thinners for paints, and they get reused as products. So that there's some brief examples, and as you can see, they're large scale. They require partnerships with the clients and with the suppliers and ourselves. We also use we take some waste from our clients, and we reuse them as fertilizers. We ammonium sulfate, and we reuse that to make fertilizers to get used in agricultural land. So that just gives you a flavor of the sort of thing that how we see the circular economy and the sort of opportunities and services we provide to the wider manufacturing and municipal industries in Ireland. So I don't know how you did on time there, Maureen, but I think that's it.
That was perfect, Declan. Thank you. And from lust to what?
From lust to dust.
From lust to dust. I love that.
When you're designing the product, before you start making it, you got to think about what it's going to be. What's the end of life? How is it actually going to be reused at the very end of its useful life? And then the dust is the decommissioning, the recycling, reuse of the product. So it's easy to remember, I guess.
That's a great way to remember it. Thank you. and as Monty Python says, now for something completely different, John, talk to us, if you would, about retail and circular economy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Curran, Head of Sustainability at Musgrave. I've been at Musgrave for about 17 years now. I'm also a Director of Repack for the last 7 years. Circular economy is a very important area for us in Musgrave. It's actually one of the 4 pillars of our sustainability strategy. So our sustainability strategy is founded on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's underpinned by the Business Working Responsibly mark and Origin Green. There are 2 main assurances, I suppose you would call them. Within our sustainability strategy, we focus on 4 separate areas. So we talk about community, because we're a business that's spread over the entire country. We have about close to 2,000 small retail stores right across the island, plus all of the other businesses that we operate around food service and wholesale. Climate action is a very important area for us and has been for a long time. So we've set ourselves the goal of becoming net zero by 2050. So clearly, again, a very big area for us. The third pillar is the circular economy in itself, and we've been working really hard over the last number of years to improve the circularity of use of resources, prevention of waste, and in particular, I suppose nowadays focusing on the whole area of packaging. It's a really important topic for consumers. I should say that the 4th pillar of our sustainability strategy looks at how we source. So sustainable sourcing, sustainable and ethical sourcing. So going back to the last comments around lust to dust, I suppose we are looking at right from the sourcing point right through to the consumer. So looking at taking an entire value chain approach, I suppose, to sustainability. As far as the circular economy goes, when I first joined Musgrave, waste was one of those things that was just part and parcel of life in retail. And you know, in those days, Ireland as a country was probably, and business in Ireland was probably, the best you would get was probably around 20 to 25% recycling within operations. We've moved that now to virtually 100%. So we've almost zero, you know, recoverable waste going to landfill. Plus the volume of waste has declined considerably during that time. So in our ambition as a business around packaging in particular, which is now the main area that people talk about in retail when it comes to the circular economy, we talk about ensuring that by 2025, 100% of the packaging that we put on the market will be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And we talk about that from the perspective of the consumer. So not that we're saying it's technically recyclable, because ultimately, if you put the resources to it, you can recycle almost anything. We want it to be easily recyclable. So that means working with government, working with other agencies to make sure that the infrastructure is appropriate as well, and can deal with the materials. But it's also about making sure that we're not compromising in what we're putting on the market, and that we don't allow our quest for better packaging to actually cause unintended consequences. So I think perhaps in the interest of time, I won't go any longer than this, but just to say that, you know, as a retail business, as a business that's been around for 140 odd years, we're all about sustainability. Sustainability is embedded in our purposes as a business. It's embedded in our corporate strategy, and the circular economy is front and center of that sustainability policy. So back to you, Maureen.
Great. Well, thank you, John. That was a really interesting perspective, and it's a stark contrast, I think, as well to the industrial perspective that Declan is bringing. And Janet, I would say from your perspective, which is kind of thinking around this from the design, you've heard elements both in what Declan has said and what John has said as well, in terms of the need for the appropriate, I suppose, design in order to facilitate circular economy. So maybe if you could just talk to us a little bit about Arup's perspective.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Janet, and I'm a circular economy consultant as Maureen said, with Arup. So circular economy, as with John's organization, is a pillar of Arup's sustainability strategy as an organization, and our sustainability strategy is integral to our corporate strategy. We've recently adopted a zero carbon strategy, and we're looking at becoming carbon neutral by 2030. So all of this supports our circular economy work and integration of circular economy design principles in our projects. So Maureen went through the three aspects of circular economy that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation include in their definition of circular economy, and are built environment knowledge partners with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for circular economy. And through the research that we've done with them and in our projects, I suppose we've identified the importance to our clients and to business of the economic aspect. So I think my favorite example is Philips, and they've got a medical devices circular facility, and this is, you know, I think one of the most I suppose interesting examples. So when they provide medical devices to hospitals all over the world, at the end of life, these medical devices that were extremely expensive were being broken out and recycled. So Philips changed the design of these monitoring devices so that each of the components could be reused. So they have a reverse logistics process where they bring those products back to a factory in the Netherlands, and they, when there's one aspect broken, they repair or recondition the rest of the device and supply a reconditioned device with a warranty to their customers. So they share the profit and the financial gain from that. So I think that's a very inspiring example of the importance of the economic and the business aspect of circular economy. So if you look at those three, designing out materials and waste, so that's the starting point for many clients and organizations in terms of circular economy. Then the second aspect was keeping your assets at their highest value. So looking at enhancing your approach to asset management when we're talking about infrastructure and buildings, where you have maybe live monitoring or digital monitoring of your asset and you're gathering data. So you extend its life as far as possible. The third aspect then was the regenerative design. So when we're designing buildings, we're looking at the deconstruction of that building and facilitating its reuse in its second life, and design for adaptability. Can that asset be relocated, for example? We're looking at innovative bridge designs, and we've also invested some money in circular facades, because that's the element of a building that's changed the most often and that's quite destructive. So a circular facade might be reusable in another location and also easily removed. So if you're looking, so that was, I suppose, around the definition of what circular economy and design is. And then I kind of put some thought to the systematic way that we approach circular design for buildings and for infrastructure. And if you start and you look at the function of the asset that you're, or the building or the infrastructure asset, so bridge, for example, that you're looking to deliver, can that function be delivered in a different way? So an example of a project that we have is the Forth Crossing, and this was for Transport for Scotland, and this was a 2.7 kilometre cable stayed bridge. And the ARP engineers that joined the project challenged the client and said, we don't think that you need to demolish the existing bridge that's there. We were asked to design a replacement bridge. And the solution that we came up with was a less resource intensive, a more circular bridge, which was a smaller bridge that was constructed alongside the existing bridge, which was refurbished to keep both bridges in use longer, where we've installed live monitoring, so and information gathering. So that's one aspect. You can look at material flow modeling when you look at constructing, and identifying value capture opportunities, and green procurement. This was acceptable aspect that we'd be looking at would be breaking out and then recycling of components. I don't know how I'm doing in time. Will I just keep going?
I think you have hit on a couple of really interesting points, Janet, from the design perspective, talking about repair, talking about extending the life, talking about adaptability, and all of that applying back to the functionality of the design that you're creating. I think that's a really good introduction. Thank you. Thank you. So our last panelist to introduce himself then is Brian. And Brian, you heard Declan talking about cement. Maybe you can enlighten us a little bit about your perspective around cement, and then also potentially Janet's tying into the construction industry as well.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Maureen. Good morning, everybody. And thanks to Business in the Community for the invitation to be on the panel this morning. My name is Brian Gilmore, and I've been working in Irish Cement now for about 14 years. I suppose Irish Cement, Janet talked about a lot of what's happening at the moment in terms of construction and looking into the future, and designing for disassembly and making businesses and buildings and structures more circular. If we go back a little bit, Irish Cement has been operating in Ireland since 1938. We've 2 cement factories, and we're very much a primary industry. If any of you on the webinar have children who are doing their junior cert, I think in the junior cert geography book, there's an example of Irish Cement as being an example of a primary industry using local raw materials. In our case, it's limestone, which you can see behind me. That's one of the quarry faces that we have in one of our cement factories as my backdrop. So we use that local material, those local resources, to get the elements that we need to make cement. I won't get too technical on it, but we need 4 elements. We need calcium, silica, aluminium, and iron in different proportions to make good quality clinker, which becomes our cement. And that's what we harvest from the natural rock around us. And I suppose from a cement manufacturing point of view, a lot of people outside the industry are not familiar with what we do within the industry. But in simple terms, we take the solid rock, we grind it up into a powder. Then at very high temperatures, we melt that rock into a liquid. It has to get to 1450 degrees. So it's literally hotter than lava in a volcano. So that's liquid rock inside of our cement kilns. We then solidify it into clinker. And then again, we grind it into a powder, which is the final cement product. So it's a very energy intensive process. And we're handling huge volumes of materials. One of our cement factories has the capacity to produce 3 million tons of cement a year. So we're talking about very large volumes of materials going through. So it's a very energy intensive process, but also we've invested hugely, 300–400 million in cement kilns to make sure they're as energy efficient as possible. And that high temperature aspect is a key advantage in the circular economy for us. We've actually been doing circular economy way before it actually became fashionable or became noticed, but we've never really spoken about it to people. For example, our cement factory in Limerick has been using pulverized fly ash, which is one of the byproducts from the coal-fired power station in Moneypoint. And that can be added into the cement manufacturing process to provide some of the key elements that I mentioned that we need. And that's been going on for more than 40 years. Now, throughout Europe, the cement industry uses those types of materials, and in other countries, there are a lot more industrial byproducts, and Declan will be familiar with Veolia across Europe, using a lot more industrial byproducts back into, you know, a value chain somewhere, maybe ending up in the cement industry. We don't have a very heavy manufacturing base in Ireland, so we don't have that many byproducts, but PFA, pulverized fly ash, is one of the materials that we do use. Our other cement factory in Platten is using solid recovered fuel, and that's to replace fossil fuels. Solid recovered fuel comes from the non-recyclable materials. So each of us in our bins are putting material in there that are not being recycled. It shouldn't go to landfill, so we're taking it instead of fossil fuels, as Declan mentioned earlier on. So there's a win-win, because not only is it providing us with energy, it actually also provides us with an element of the minerals that we need for our production process. So for example, John talked about packaging. Many of the composite packages that we all use in our daily lives has an aluminium foil in there somewhere. Makes it very hard to recycle as an aluminium material, but we can take that into our kilns at the very high temperatures, and that aluminium becomes part of our product. So it's actually a hidden element of recycling that's happening. And just as an example, in Platten, over 50,000 tons over the last few years of bauxite, which would be an alternative source of alumina that we would normally import, has been displaced because we're getting the alumina from our fuels, the alternative fuels we're taking in. So our cement goes into the concrete industry. And I suppose a key point is the concrete that goes into our buildings and our structures is 100% recyclable. So all of the elements in there can be taken back. They're not being taken back at the moment. And you mentioned, Maureen, in your introduction, that about 9% of the global economy is circular at the moment. So, you know, as an industry in the construction sector, we have a lot more to do, that's for sure. But it's often down to the fact that our infrastructure hasn't come to end of life yet. And Janet talked about the fact that if you can extend the life or make the building, you know, repurpose the building, that's maybe more energy efficient and a lot more resource efficient than knocking down the building, like the example you gave of the bridge. You know, why don't you just use what's already there? So there's a lot to do. I think timescale is one of the big challenges. You know, smaller, shorter, circular movements in the economy are easier to observe, but maybe if you've a building that's going to last for 100 or more years, it's very hard to see at human scale that that's actually circular, that's going to come back into the production process again.
That's a great point, Brian. And actually, you mentioned something, you hit upon something there that, and just to say, we've got a few questions that have come in already. If everybody could kind of just be thinking about some questions that they can ask the panel, we'll start to get to those in a second. But you just touched upon something that was really interesting, Brian, and I want to ask this of you. So I was looking at an EPA study that talked about there was 6.2 million tons of concrete waste, construction waste, excuse me, in 2018. Only 9% of that was recycled. Now, 77% of it is soil and stone, and that was backfilled, but 12% of that was concrete and building rubble and things like that. So how do we make the construction industry? That is one of the target areas on the Circular Economy Action Plan. How do we make the construction industry more circular, do you think?
Yeah, I suppose one of the challenges, Ireland doesn't do that well in terms of recycling some of those heavyweight components in buildings. Now, what is happening at the moment is the industry is getting better, and it's taking concrete, it's crushing up the concrete, it's extracting the steel, because there's often steel reinforcement bars in there, and that can go off for recycling. Then the concrete is getting crushed into aggregates, and aggregates are being brought back into some construction products for the road bases. In Ireland, we're blessed with very, very good aggregates as a natural resource. And I suppose the industry has developed a supply chain around the country of quarries and pits that are able to provide good quality aggregates. One of the, I suppose, the requests for the sector is to try and develop standards. so that we as an industry can, with our customers in the concrete industry and the waste industry as well, can produce a recycled aggregate to a standard that allows it to be used by people like Arup and other engineers and designers in projects where they have complete confidence. I suppose the construction industry throughout the full construction supply chain, from ourselves in the cement industry to architects and engineers, it's quite risk averse. People don't like to take risks when you're building, a piece of infrastructure. So they want something that's trusted, tried and tested, and they know is going to operate. Other countries around the world, the Netherlands has a very high level of recycling, and that's largely because they're very poor in terms of natural raw materials. So what they have, they really need to use, and they've come up with some very good circular examples. For instance, they've already developed roads where they don't necessarily put in the most high-grade bitumen and tarmac. They actually make it so that it can be recycled very easy, so that at the end of its life, it may not last the full life of a very hard-wearing road. It lasts a few years less, but it's much easier for them to take up that pavement and to extract the value from it and to produce a new pavement and put it back down again. So I think, yes, in Ireland, we have a bit more to do, but I think the industry is becoming a lot more aware of the responsibilities and what we can do throughout the full value chain in terms of recycling concrete.
Great,
You mentioned about the EPA and the whole area of end of waste is also another challenge that we're working with the regulators on, to make sure that when we take materials back in, they're produced to a high level, a high standard, and that they're not a waste any longer, they're now a product.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point that you make, Brian. There is, I suppose, hesitation on, in terms of quality of secondary raw materials. And John, just flipping over to you, and also in terms of, I suppose, consumer behavior, there's a bit of a challenge that retailers face. The new Waste Action Plan is going to call for fully recyclable packaging by 2030, but at the same time, they're also calling for a food waste reduction target. So that seems like a heck of a challenge to me. Can you talk a little bit about those trade-offs and how Musgrave is responding?
It's a very good point, Maureen. I talk a lot to people about sustainability, and even within the business and outside of the business. And one of the things that I always try to emphasize, the fact is that there is nothing you can do that will deliver an absolute solution, that there is always some sort of a trade-off and there are always risks associated. And what you have to try and do is navigate to the best possible solution, but accept at the same time that there may be compromises along the way. And this is the case with packaging. There has been a huge drive, I suppose, for the removal of packaging, and we forget, I suppose, we take for granted the ability to be able to eat what we want, how we want, when we want. So strawberries in December or exotic fruits in any time of the year, and I think when you take account of how things move around the world, they couldn't do successfully and avoid food waste or loss without packaging. And I think it's also worth saying that it's not that long ago that food additives were a major concern for people, because packaging wasn't quite up to the job of preserving food, so we had to rely on additives. A lot more of the food we eat today is kept fresh because we're using plastics with modified atmospheres within the pack, and that preserves food. So we're on a major drive within the business. We've set ourselves a 5-year timeline. Some people would say that's too slow, and if we can do it faster, we will. But we have to really recognize that packaging has evolved over many decades to where it is today. Materials have evolved, and you simply can't turn the switch off and expect that you can continue business as usual when you make massive changes like that. So it has to be evolutionary to a degree rather than revolutionary in my view. So we're pushing ahead with our program, but we've set ourselves very ambitious targets. But at the same time, that's not at the cost of increasing food waste. So we have to be aware that we could strip the packaging off everything tomorrow, but everything would go off in a supermarket environment where you have lights, air conditioning, you have people handling the product. You start stripping everything back to the bare minimum, you will have problems. We're actually going in the opposite direction at the moment because of the pandemic. People actually want more packaging on their product, but that won't be around forever. And once the pandemic subsides, you know, we'll start to go back to the way we were. But certainly for us, and we've a lot of people within the business now working on projects that are looking to really understand our packaging at sort of at macro level, but also right down to individual product detail, and then make the changes that we need to make to hit our 2025 targets.
I'll tell you, John, I do not envy you that balancing act that you're having to make.
It is a nightmare, because, you know, if a consumer buys a product and the packaging isn't fit for purpose, what happens? The product gets returned, or you lose that customer, or whatever. So you know, we cannot compromise on quality. We cannot compromise on food safety. They're absolute, you know, non-negotiables. And it's how do you achieve the perfect balance? And sometimes that's a struggle. It's a struggle because of, you know, we operate in a very low margin business. You cannot throw money at solving problems like packaging and introduce all kinds of, you know, say new materials that are not necessarily tried and trusted, because you can't take the risk. So we have to move slowly and not at the same time create new risks.
Yeah. I think that is a really important point. And in this sort of evolution, I suppose, of the journey, some organizations, as I mentioned, are kind of thinking about it in terms of their own operations. Some of them are actually thinking about it in terms of their business model as a whole. One of our audience members notes that all of the businesses represented by the panelists seem to have adopted a circular economy model some time ago. And Declan, maybe you can answer this next question, particularly because, you know, from Veolia's perspective, this is your brand. Your brand is a circular economy business. So the question here is, how much of a mindset shift has there had to occur for the business to move towards that circular economy business model, and what changes needed to happen? Was Veolia always a circular economy company, or was there a transition from a traditional waste company to a circular economy? And if so, how did that transition happen?
Well, Veolia started off life as a water treatment company, where they put the first water treatment in Paris back in 1876 or something like that. And so it started off as a water treatment company, and then over the years moved into the waste and the energy sector, and you know, over the 20th century and into the 21st century, moved then towards sort of embrace the circular economy and the sustainability industry. So now our brand is an environmental services, you know, and preserving resources across the planet, and that's what we would see ourselves. So we've been like many of the other panelists, we've been on this journey for a long time, and I suppose it's clear that we can't do it you can't do it on your own. One company can't do it on its own. You know, it takes the overall industry to move in sync in order to move the wheel of the circular economy. For instance, if you're bringing in secondary liquid fuel into one of Brian's plants, or alternative raw materials like the clinker into one of Brian's plants, that requires cooperation. Requires the original producer to build his plant so he can segregate the materials appropriately. So yes, we think about that. It requires someone like Veolia to be able to pre-treat it to get into a format that's suitable for Brian's company, and then it requires the cement company to build its plant in such a way that it can accept it, and to operate in such a way that it can have the assurance and confidence that the quality is there in the materials that are arriving. So it has to work together. So I would say over the last 20 years, you're starting to see that mindset moving across the whole supply chain, and you're starting to see the investment to allow you to do these treatments and to build the plants that will allow for segregation and reuse of materials. So, you know, what we would see in Veolia is we would see that there is an investment there in underlying assets. So and adoption by a wider by the wider industry. So we should get this sort of network effect that as it gets more popular or more prevalent, this sort of treatment, then it'll build and build, and eventually it's going to be the, you know, as we can see, it is the only acceptable way to move forward, and we think that will. So we would see that it will accelerate according as it becomes more popular. The more popular it becomes, the faster it will be adopted.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right about that. I think business gets it. I'm not sure if consumers are getting it yet, but I think they're starting to kind of to come along. So maybe there's, in some respects, that transition for you being a B2B sort of industry maybe makes it a little bit easier, because you can create a business case that is financially that makes financial sense. There's a bit of hesitation, as you know, Brian mentioned, perhaps about quality issues, but at the same time, it provides people working in these companies with immediate sort of cost reduction or cost avoidance activities, as well as an opportunity for secondary raw materials. Janet, just from your perspective, again, this sort of internal cultural shift that's occurring within Arup, I suppose, as you're moving forward with a more circular design approach. Has it always been there? Was there a specific effort towards it? What happened there?
I think, so the first part of the question about training and things like that. So we have a corporate sustainability strategy that's very much embedded in our overall corporate strategy. And part of that, when you look at it, is learning arm, and it's very strong. So it's our leadership, our leading in terms of, so one of our 6 pillars of sustainability and our corporate strategy is circular economy. And the learning aspect comes from both the leadership side, and then also there's training available for all levels of staff, lunch and learns, these type of webinars internally within Arup. And then our flagship projects where we've implemented circular economy principles. So in the UK, the High Speed 2 rail project is a circular construction project. So we use tools like designing out waste workshops. So we identified the top 10 materials in terms of value, and this goes to what Brian was talking about in the highways industry. It would be bitumen, for example. You pick your top value materials, and you target those in terms of circular interventions and where you put your energy to, and you try to bring about cost savings. So in High Speed 2, the designing out waste workshops achieved, I suppose, like 1.3, I think, billion in total of the savings for that project. So that was a circular intervention, and then circular actions came out of it. But where we add the value, and I suppose it's been always embedded in our culture, when the firm was set up by Ove Arup in the early 1960s, he had a culture of total design, where he brought together architects and all different types of engineers in designing your buildings and your infrastructure. And I think those tools have stood to us in the last 10 or 15 years as our projects became more circular. So we can draw on the range of services we provide. So I can contact within our internal knowledge networks are extremely strong. So I can immediately reach out to the sustainable concrete expert, the bio-based materials specialist globally that has worked on these flagship projects, and draw them into my project in Ireland. And so we have, we'd have that expertise from those flagship projects and a total design approach. So I suppose in the last 10 or 15 years, circular economies come into our sustainability strategy and our corporate strategy, but the total design aspect that's necessary for circular economy to succeed. So look at every step along the life cycle of a construction project. That culture was always there, and that stood to us now when we're implementing circular economy in projects. So that's why they're succeeding, I suppose, that we're doing well in that space. Yeah.
Like it's been a journey, but it sounds like you've got a pretty robust structure in place, as you said, with the ability to kind of tap into the various areas of expertise as needed. So So that is interesting. Now I'm going to say we've got several more questions from our audience, and I'd like to, whatever we don't get to, we can answer separately and post that and send it out. But just in terms of a couple of these questions, I'm going to open it up to whoever wants to answer this one. It's a question about the challenges related to Ireland's geographical location within the EU. Does that create specific challenges around the circular economy? For example, the cost of imports and exports, or maybe opportunities even, you know, does it create opportunities there? And where are the potential areas that government could support? Anybody want to take that?
I might have a go at that one. Yeah, I think it is. I think it's an absolutely crucial point. Being a small island nation on the periphery of Europe does bring challenges. Very small indigenous packaging industry, so therefore the vast majority of the packaging that we consume ends up having to be exported to be reprocessed. Packaging, like all materials, have economic values, and when you have low oil prices and you therefore have lower cost of virgin material, which means that you immediately create a barrier to the use of recycled. So therefore you don't have that pull. So I think it's a challenge that isn't probably going to go away. There are probably things that we can do as a country around maybe developing infrastructure, but it's almost a I suppose it's by virtue of the fact of where we are. It does create barriers around things like remanufacturing or reprocessing, and how do we get around that? And I think government could probably stimulate or at least help business in that regard around maybe giving direction. And I think somebody asked, I think, around the climate action plan. I think that one of the good things about the climate action plan is it gives us a lot of certainty about things that were probably in doubt before. And the more certainty you give government signals to business, then the more people are likely to invest in potential projects. And I think there's an opportunity for Ireland to take care of more of its materials if the conditions, let's say, were right, the economic conditions were right.
That's a really good point, John. And you mentioned the climate action bill. There's actually another question around that. And Brian, I know you were talking about the climate action bill as well. The question here is, what aspects of that are most beneficial to you, and what parts are you most concerned or fearful of? I'd say limits on carbon is probably pretty potentially an issue there.
Yeah, I suppose that the cement industry at a European level is part of the emissions trading scheme, the European emissions trading scheme. So we already have a limit, a cap and trade system where the cap is coming down all the time, and the next phase is being, I suppose, finalized at the moment. So we're about to hear early next year where our limits are going to be, and that's administered in Ireland by the EPA. So the challenge, I suppose, in the climate action bill would be, the carbon tax. Is there another carbon tax coming that's going to impact on business, where we as a sector within the emissions trading scheme are already paying a price for carbon, and how does that actually work? I suppose a recognition that double taxation doesn't help, particularly in the basis that we export a significant portion of our product to other markets. But the opportunity within the bill and also the earlier climate action plan that came out in 2019, there's a recognition that replacing fossil fuels is a key goal for the country, for businesses, for individuals, and that's something that we're on the pathway there. The climate action plan from 2019 had a specific target for the cement industry that by 2030, which is not that far away now, we need to replace 80% of our fossil fuels with other materials, other fuels, and so that's something that we're very keen to get involved. Because the Platten example I gave, our facility in Platten, over its history since 2011 has used nearly 1 million tons of alternative fuels. So that material didn't have to go to landfill, didn't have to get exported, and it's very much working in collaboration, as Declan was talking about earlier, with the supply chain and working with the waste industry for them to produce a fuel to our specification. So it is very much tapping into that whole collaboration around the circular economy. So I think the opportunity is that we as an island can do more. For us, to replace our imported fossil fuels. I mean, as an island, we're still very dependent at the larger scale on imported fossil fuels. So what can we do with indigenous resources to reduce that would be something that I think we should all be looking forward to.
That's an excellent response. Thank you, Brian. And we've got a couple more questions, but you know, I suppose the one thing that I would like to give our audience is, and I thank the audience for asking the questions that they have. They've been very thought-provoking. But one thing I'd like the audience to have is maybe one thing that they can take away from this, that they can do in their own lives or in their own companies to be able to adopt a more circular approach. So can I have each one of our panelists, and you're only going to have about 30 seconds. So if you could give, each one of our panelists could give 30 seconds on one thing that they would recommend people do, either from a personal perspective or from a company perspective, to try to create a more circular world today. I would appreciate it. And whoever wants to go first can go first.
Well, maybe I'll just jump in there. My one recommendation, and having looked at this whole area, is it's around measurement. Janet talked about having data and input, and I think unless you measure it either as an individual, you know, at home, if you know what's going in your bins and you understand the cost of the various bins, you can make some changes. And I think the waste industry has started to, I suppose, give feedback to people now. Many people are paying by weight, so they can actually understand that. But I suppose as businesses, if you understand where the waste is going, there's a startup company in the UK called Winnow, and that's put in, it started out working on smart water meters and electricity meters, but it's now put in meters in kitchens around the world measuring waste, so that industrial kitchens, restaurants, hotels are actually measuring where their food waste is going, and that's led to huge savings. So I think measuring and understanding where your waste is going and trying to understand the opportunities that are there would be my key takeaway.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Measuring and understanding waste. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the power of the individual here is huge. I think, you know, so many of the choices that we make as individuals add up to, you know, the challenges that we have. I always say that, you know, when you look at the circular economy, it's actually an economy of lots of smaller circles all adding up to a big circle, if you like. So I think the power of personal choice here is really important. So, you know, if you take, for instance, again, just to bring it back to the simple thing of packaging, you know, when you go to shop in the store, look at the options that are available to you. We often have consumers who say that they don't want packaging, yet you look at how they behave. So, you know, we have research and we compare research to actual behaviors, and sometimes people say one thing. So there's quite a big, what we call a say-do gap. So people talk about things, but they don't always follow it through themselves. So I think it's about knowing that the choices are in your hands. Make the choice and live the life you want to live in terms of its degree of circularity.
Brilliant. The power of personal choice. I love that, John. Thank you. Janet, what do you think? What's your one thing?
So I build on what Brian was saying. I think, so looking at it from our client's perspective, modeling resource flows. So looking at what happens to your asset at its end of life, or what happens to your product. If you're putting a product out in the market, look at all the materials and all the labor you're putting into that. And could you put in place reverse logistics? Can you bring that back and reuse it again with a slight modification or an upgrade? If you're placing a facade on your building, for example, at that end of life, can that be reused by somebody else? Can it easily be detached? So my takeaway for our clients, what I would love is if they would consider all of their products and their assets, the whole life value of it, and keeping it at the highest value. So I think that's kind of a really circular approach.
That's a great point, Janet, and certainly producer responsibility, an important topic within the circular economy. Declan, the last word goes to you. You started us, you can end us as well.
The guys took all my good ideas there, no, I think just building on John says, personal responsibility. Like I think the way businesses can help that is education. So we provide, you know, we provide waste service to a lot of companies, and they ask us to come in and do environmental awareness days, and it's just education. It's pretty low tech, you know. It's just illustrating to them how they can segregate at work, what it means if you don't segregate, and then also how they can apply that to their home life. And it can be people find it very interesting. They say, "Wow, I never knew that. This is, you know, I should be doing that. It's not a big deal for me. I can do that. I just didn't know the benefits or the implications." And then you can also have a bring day where they bring items that they would have thrown out, but they can be recycled, so they bring them into work, and it's a win-win. You know, it's knowledge that, you know, we would have in the waste industry be pretty basic for us, but it's just trying to get that across with the support of the companies, just to raise that environmental awareness. So it's an easy step, and it's something that we can do and that companies can do.
Absolutely. Once again, the power of personal choice. And I think also being an influencer among your friends and networks and that as well, to try to help others, educate others and drive good choices around circular economy. Well, that is all the time that we have today. We were going to do another poll, but I think we're a bit short on time. So the only thing that I will say to close this out, other than thank you so much to our panelists today who provided such wonderful insights on the circular economy, is we've got a couple of events coming up that I'd like you all to mark your diaries for. November 12th, we have In Conversation with Paul Pullman, which should be really interesting. The Business Working Responsibly Mark celebration, John mentioned that being an important part of our year. So December 9th, mark your calendars for that one. And then we have our annual members meeting following directly afterwards. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you once again to our panelists. It's been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and it's a great way to kick off our series in circular economy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, guys.